All right. So today is session number 11, and we will cover software testing types part 2. So in part 1, we already went over, I think, 10 or 11 different testing techniques. So now is part 2, and we also have another maybe 10 or 11 different techniques. Those are very crucial because in this, when you write your test case or when you have to test something, some of those techniques you may going to use. And during the interview, they're probably going to ask some of those techniques. But in the real work, you're probably going to use 8 or 9 different techniques. So we're going to go over black box, somebody you already know, white box, boundary value, exploratory testing, experience-based testing, backend, risk-based, usability testing, security, and UAT. So maybe a few of them you already know what is that, right? So black box, white box, UAT, just some things are familiar to all of you guys. All right, let me just start. Okay. So part 2, black box testing. So in the previous session, we talked about black box testing can be called functional testing, right? Or system testing. It can call either way. But black box testing, if somebody asks you what is the black box testing, if you kind of take the definition from here and kind of tell them, that would be very, appropriate, So black box testing is software testing in which functionality of the software under test is validated without looking at the internal code, implementation details, and knowledge of internal path of the software. So what it is saying, when you follow this technique, you don't need to know anything about how the code is written, how the code is working, or how code is impacting other codes. You don't need to know anything about it. You only need to know what? You only need to know input and output, right? Input coming from the requirement, it will say what data or what information you need to enter in that particular field, and output what you'll be getting after that programming logic or process runs, right? So that's the only two things you're going to care about. Okay, so that's why it's called black box. You see, so black box, the reason it comes black box, because this is like, black area, like, when it is dark, do you know anything happening? No, right? Because it's black. You don't need to know anything about it. That's why it's called black box. That's how they came up with this name, because you don't need to know anything. It's all dark. You only care about input and output. So black box testing emphasizes the use of control input and validation of the output without having whatever I just said, internal knowledge of the software program. The testing method is also known as behavioral testing and based entirely on the software requirement and system specification. So what is software requirement? Business requirement, right? System specification is FRS.
Yes.
And it also called behavioral testing. So, I mean, sometimes you may have to know different name, what it calls for one technique. So you can also call behavioral testing. So input and output, you see, like it's very simple. I mean, whenever somebody asks you the definition, look at this picture and see what is happening, input and output. And inside there are a lot of code or logic. You don't need to know anything about it. That's what it called black box. Clear? Okay. So the white box testing is the validation of a software solution internal coding and infrastructure. So you need to know how the code is written and how it is kind of interacting with another piece of code and all those different, like, technical information you need to know. Okay. So when you have to do this testing, right? So when you have to know whether those codes have any major impact on something else, or let's say, like, sometimes developer wrote some codes and he did not follow proper coding standard, right? Let's say you are working with a sloppy developer. He did not care about those coding standard, or he did not care about all those security implication that software may can have because of his code. So at this type of situation, you may have to follow this white box testing technique, because you may have some knowledge of how to read the code, and you may have to tell him or point him saying, hey, you did not write the code correctly because there is some sort of like, invalid variable, or there's some issue in your code, you may have to take a look at it. Okay, so at this type of situation, you may gonna follow white box testing. And this technique, let me tell you something, if you are getting into the role like brand new, like, if you're a new employee or you have no idea how the process works, you're not gonna follow this technique. But if somebody is in this industry, or if somebody is working in the QA role for 8-9 years, he may gonna follow this technique, because at this time he probably know how to read the code, and he probably kind of familiar with the process. Does it make sense?
Yes.
So for the beginner, you may not gonna follow these techniques. You're only gonna care about this one. But you need to know for the definition purpose what it is happening. So basically, you need to know the flow, input and output through the application, and improving design and the usability. So why you need to kind of know those information? You need to know those information to find some sort of design issue or flow, or if there is some sort of usability issue, to know those type of problem, you can follow this technique. Okay. So whitebox testing ensures that all integrated components in terms of process, code level coverage, and path coverage are tested correctly. So what basically saying that, there's a lot of like, path, right? So if there's a code written, there's if else, means like if something happen, like if this is X, then it would do Y, or if this is X plus Y, it should do something else. So there are like a lot of logic, a lot of path, a lot of like flow code may can have. So when you kind of follow through that logic, it called white box testing. It would also require a full analysis of find possible breakpoints. So basically what it is saying, to follow this technique, you have to knowledgeable about the code. If you don't know anything about code, how the code is written, then you may not gonna follow that. Okay. So white box testing, also called clear box, open box, structural testing, transparent box testing, code-based testing, glass box testing. So if somebody asks you that, can you tell me what is clear box testing? You have to say the same definition of the white box. So those are 6 different names it can be called. Make sense?
Yes.
So as you can see, input, and you already know what is happening inside. That's why it's kind of clear. And you know the output based on this logic inside, you kind of know what is going to show or what is going to come out. Any question on this white and black, because those are the 2 important ones? Okay, so the next one is called boundary value testing. It's almost like boundary testing. Okay, so if you just take out this value, it's almost like boundary testing. But the reason it says value, because of this picture, I'm going to tell you what. So boundary testing is a process of testing between extreme ends of the boundary or partition of the input values. The testing technique requires identification of boundaries based on equivalence class, discussed in the prior section, right? Boundary testing comes after the equivalence class partitioning. So I would not really worry about those other definition, because this is just kind of definition. It's kind of talk about when you know the boundary. So other day we talk about the boundary from 1 to 100, right? The range. So you can test anything from 1 to 100. Okay. So in these techniques, you only going to pick the data or number based on the extreme end, or based on initial point. So initial point is A, right? So in my example, if the range from 1 to 100, any number close to 1, you will be picking for this type of testing. So let's say the close to 1 would be like 4 or 5, right? You're not gonna pick like 50, because this is in the middle. So the boundary value testing, you'll be picking the data based on either extreme end, which is this, or maybe the initial point. Okay, you'll be picking the number based on that. You also can pick anything in the middle, but you're not gonna pick randomly either. I mean, the reason you are just picking initial and end, That way it will give like, some sort of like, credibility, saying, hey, I cascade with like, very initial range and also very extreme range, and I also tested within the middle range. So you are basically covering everything. You don't have to do like, 1 to 100. You just kind of say, I pick a number from initial part, and then I pick a number from like, very end part. And that's how I came up with the, my test data. When it follow that, when you follow this technique, is called boundary value testing. So the reason you do that, sometimes developer can do some sort of like, coding. They probably can do like, bad coding, which would open some sort of like, issue when you try to like, test something with the initial number, like close to the initial point. Because in the coding there's a lot of different way of doing things. Maybe they forget to add some sort of like, checking on error handling piece in the initial part. But if you just do anything from like the middle to the end, if you just pick anything from middle to the end, you may gonna like, you may gonna like, lose that chance of like, finding defect in the initial point. So that's why it is very kind of essential to perform the boundary value testing. So you will cover everything: initial, middle, and end. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So those are more like, it's talk about another type of testing. It's called equivalence class partitioning. It also called that because you are basically partitioning the whole thing into the 3 sections, right? Initial, middle, and end. So when you kind of do that, it also called equivalence class partitioning. That's what it also called. Any question on this?
No.
Okay. Exploratory testing. So what is the word explore means? The word explore means you randomly like, run through your testing in the application. You don't have any information, you don't have any sort of requirement, or you're not going to look at the requirement. You randomly click here, there, just to kind of see how the thing works. So for example, you don't know what it will be under FAQ section. You're going to click on here, you're going to try to see what is in there. You're going to go to the sign up section. You randomly kind of clicking the software just to get yourself familiar with it, or maybe try to find what is happening. Okay. So in this type of situation, when you follow this technique, it's called exploratory testing.
It has a similarity with the negative testing, right?
What is that?
It has a similarity with the negative testing.
It can be negative, it can be positive, it can be smoke testing. I would say maybe kind of smoke testing is kind of similar. It's just you're just randomly clicking, just try to understand the application. And maybe if you're lucky enough, when you kind of doing the exploratory testing, you may gonna find a defect.
Okay.
For a good example, like, when you are like clicking on the about us, you will get some sort of, maybe you can get page 404 error, which is like, page not found or something.
Yeah.
Then you probably can say, hey, there's some bug in this about us section. When I click on it, it shows that error. So in this technique, you don't necessarily look at the code or requirement. You basically kind of exploring the application. You're just randomly clicking, try to understand what does that application look like. When you
Right.
follow this technique, it's called exploratory testing. So it's all about discovery, investigation, and learning, right? You are learning the application. You are trying to see how the application function. It emphasizes personal freedom and responsibility of the individual user. So it does not have any limitation. It does not have any guideline how you're gonna perform that. It's based on your experience. It's based on your knowledge, right? You're gonna randomly click through it. And another thing is that, look at this. Typically, the test cases are not created in advance. So quality assurance engineer validate the system on the fly. So basically, when you perform this type of testing, you don't have to create test case. So if somebody asks you which technique does not require you to create test case, what are you gonna say? This one. You're gonna say
Exploratory.
exploratory testing does not require me to create test case, because basically I'm exploring the application, trying to see how the application works, or trying to understand how the function will show or something like that. So that's a good interview question people can ask. So exploratory testing is suitable for Agile Scrum framework. So you know that we kind of went over that, right? In Agile Scrum, we have very limited time. We have very kind of time box situation where we have to perform the task within the timely manner. Sometimes when there is deadline, when things has to kind of deliver as soon as possible, you may not have to create test case, or you may not have time to create test case. So in this situation, you will be doing what? This one, exploratory testing. So exploratory testing technique can assist quality assurance engineer to write test plan, design, execute test cases, all while they're learning and gathering the other items. So what it is saying, so if you follow this technique, it will help you to create test case in future. So when I give you something to work on, at first, are you going to start writing, or are you going to start documenting it? You're probably going to start looking into it by clicking here and there and try to get feel of it, right?
Right.
So this technique will help you to write test case in the future, because once you know where it is, where to go to find that, everything is in the requirement. But when you have something physically there for you to see, your first step would be looking it by your clicking it through, going here and there, try to understand the process. So that's why it is saying that this technique probably going to help you to write test case in the future.
Right.
So this technique should be followed. There is tight deadline. So whatever I just said. So let's say there's a tight deadline in your sprint, and maybe you have to fix some sort of production issue. So they deploy something in the production, and that there's some issue came up. When you have to test that, you can follow this technique, because you don't have time to write test case, right? You can follow this technique, and you can able to test that fix. Make sense?
Yes.
So exploratory testing is very efficient when quality assurance engineers have a good understanding of the product and process. So this is very helpful, useful. So let's say, so maybe a lot of you already know in this QA Dimension website where to go to find stuff, right? You probably can go to the course, you go to navigate here. That's how you know how to get to that course section. So you already have some sort of familiarity of the application. So if somebody asks you can you tell me how to go to this different other course, so you already know where this particular section is going to be, because you already have some familiarity of this application, right? So what it is saying that this technique is very useful when you know the application very well. Like if you know the Facebook, let's say Facebook, right? You guys use Facebook all the time. You guys already know where to go to search the friend name, where to go to see your profile. You already know everything. So when you have very familiarity of the application, this technique is very useful. That way you can go and kind of navigate and do some quick testing. Make sense?
Yes.
So this is whole purpose of this technique. At first you are learning, right? You are first learning by navigating, going through here and there. Then once you learn, you're probably going to design your testing, because now you already know where is where, I mean, what is where and how those are functioning. Then you're probably going to write your test case. Test design and test case creation are same thing. Okay. If somebody said that test design is just talking about test case creation, test case development, that's what they're talking about. Okay. And then test execution, you already know what is test execution. And then analysis. Analysis is more like once you run your testing, you're probably gonna analyze your test result, right? Because you have to make sure that if it's matching with your expected and actual. So this whole technique is just kind of make sure that you're learning the application, then you're probably going to design your test case, then you're going to execute your test case, and after that you're going to analyze the result. So that's the whole purpose of this technique. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so next one is called experience-based testing. So as it sounds like, you need to have some experience in the application, right? So let's say you're working in a company for 20 years or 10 years. Okay. And you are working in the same application for last 10 years, so you'd be the very pro in this application. You know in and out about the application because you've been working in this application for a number of years, right?
Right.
So if somebody tell you that, hey, can you tell me where to go, where to go and find some specific option or specific module, you are probably gonna kind of say it right away because you already know the application well.
Right.
You, since you worked on that application, you may already gonna know what had happened in this application previously, or what area that application had where there's a lot of issues exist, right? You
Mm.
probably know all those information, because if you work in a company, you're probably gonna know what happened in this company before. Same thing in here. If you work in an application for a number of years, you're probably gonna know what that application had before, or what kind of defect it had before, and all those different functions and features. So when you leverage or when you use those information in determining your testing, when you use this information to write your test case or to design your test case, it called experience-based testing. So basically, it's solely based on quality assurance engineers' experience, your knowledge of the application. Domain is, domain, right? Different area, business area. Their understanding of the system components. You already know which module contain what and how they function. When you know those type of information, you probably can follow this technique. Okay.
Mm.
This testing technique should be utilized when QA engineer is very familiar with a process, related design, program code, change history, defect history, and business impact. So you already know all those information. So if you know those information ahead of time, this technique is very useful. Make sense?
Yes.
All these factors will need to be considered to identify test case scenarios. So if you know, let's kind of go back to this example. If you know, like previously, maybe in past, there are lots of defect in this module, contact us module, you're probably gonna target your testing surrounding this area because you already know there's a lot of defect in this area. So you're gonna target there to find more defect. Make sense?
Yes.
So that's why it's saying that you're probably gonna target some specific area to either find defect or either to identify test scenarios. So in the Agile Scrum framework, this testing technique can be utilized to target specific scenarios based on qualifications needed prior involvement with the process and system. So in the Agile Scrum, it is very useful because you're probably gonna work on that area for like a long time. Let's say if you work on this application for 2-3 years or 4 years, you may gonna have some sort of knowledge about how it was working before or whether there was any issue in that particular area. When you follow this type of technique or when you follow this type of process, it called experience-based testing. Clear?
Yes.
So this is a good picture of kind of demonstrate what is experience-based testing is. So error guessing. Error guessing can come from different way. If you're very familiar with this application for a long time, and if you know which area most of the errors were coming from before, you're probably gonna target that area, right?
Mm.
And then you're gonna do like checklist. You're gonna do some sort of checklist saying, okay, I'm gonna test this five or six options or feature because I know there are a lot of defects out there. You're gonna create some sort of checklist, and
Yes.
then you're gonna start testing. Adapt testing means start testing. You're gonna just kind of target that testing. You're gonna just kind of test that particular features or function, and then you're going to perform the exploratory testing. So what? So this one. So basically what it is saying that once you follow this, your last step, this is more like optional, you don't have to do that, but they are recommending you, saying that okay, if you already done those 3 different steps, and after that you probably can do some sort of exploratory testing. So you already know which area most of the defects are, you already tested them. Now you're probably going to go to the different module and kind of explore the different area. We're gonna click through that. You're gonna see how those different areas are showing. You can do that, right? So that's the last step. So that's what the experience-based testing is. So this two, experience and exploratory, they kind of go hands on hand. They kind of go
Mm.
together.
Okay.
Any question?
No,
So is it easy, guys, or is it so hard for you?
no, it's easy. It's easy actually.
Okay, so I mean, this is very easy in terms of once you understand, you can just kind of tell that during the interview. The next one is called risk-based testing. So what does it mean? So I talk about specific area, right? So so let me kind of go to the different example. So you already know, let's for an example, you already know there are bunch of code section out there, and if people can navigate to that section and see what the code syllabus is, or to see what is the session outline is, you know this is the area where it is very critical for that application. Because if somebody comes to this website, at first they're going to look into their course, right? How many different courses are out there, and then they're going to decide which one to pick, right? So for me, my very critical module or very essential module is this module, right? It's for
Yes.
my understanding because everything is there. So when you know there's like, you know, this is a business critical or this is the critical component of an application, when you kind of like, you know that area, and when you target that particular area to test something, it's called risk-based testing. So it's saying that, you know, risk-based testing is a prioritization the features, module, and function of the application under test based on impact and likelihood of the failure. So impact means the business impact. For me, is very crucial, and also likelihood of failure means maybe there's some potential possibility that there could be some features or options are not showing. So and you already know there is some sort of risk there. So you kind of want to make sure that that area is working fine. When you follow this type of like, you know, analogy, this type of technique is called risk-based testing. Okay,
Yeah.
so it involves assessing the risk based on the complexity, means how complicated this system is or module is, business criticality, how crucial is that for business or for company to survive, you know, usage frequency, how frequent the user go to that area to see the course or see the options, and visible areas, like, you know, how transparent or is it some sort of like, you know, customer facing or customer is seeing it or not. So if something is like, you know, customer is going to see each time they go to your web page, you want to make sure that web page is visible all the time. So when you think about all those factors to consider, whether those are crucial or not, if you follow that, it called risk-based testing. Does it make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. So so how are you going to determine which area is business critical? So you have to ask those three questions. Okay, what do we have, means like, you know, what is that application all about, or what is that business all about? It's just kind of internal question. You probably can ask yourself, what do we have, what are the risks? I mean, if we have this, so in my website the crucial thing is courses section. So in my answer would be like, you know, what do we have? My answer would be, I have course module in my website. Okay, and the next question is, what are the risks? My risk is if that module doesn't show, my student cannot see my course or they cannot enroll. That's my risk, right?
Yes.
And what is changing? So the changing is, so let's say for example, if I'm adding another course here, right, there's a new ad, right? Or maybe if I remove any of those course, so that's something is changing. So
Yes.
you are asking those questions to yourself to determine, okay, do I have to target that area or not? Okay, so based on that, you will be like, you know, determining which area shows more risk. Okay, so for these techniques you will be asking those three questions. Okay, and you're gonna determine, okay, so based on my question, I'm gonna target that area. I'll make sure that area or this module is working correctly. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, next one is called usability testing. Okay, so it's very simple. I know I don't have to explain a lot of, I don't have to spend a lot of time on that. Usability testing is how user friendly the application is. I think I told you guys other day. So if my web application shows the search box in bottom, or if the course option was showing some other place, or maybe if the course, let's say the course option is showing under the home option, or maybe it's showing under the contact us option. So it's not user friendly. You guys cannot navigate to my website, right?
Yes.
So when you follow, when you kind of understand, when you kind of when you want to assess, or when you want to see whether those are followed correctly, it's called usability testing. Okay,
Mhm.
it's just based on your how user friendly the software or the application is. Okay, that's called the usability testing. And the backend testing is most of the time you guys would be doing, and there will be some interview question in it. And you remember I have a couple of sessions on the SQL. So those SQL 1, 2, 3, all those three session will be focusing on the backend testing. Okay, how you'll be performing the backend testing, because backend testing, whatever you are seeing here, where it is storing in the backend table or database, right? You have to make sure whatever is showing here is also stored in the database,
Mhm.
correct? So when you make sure that whatever you are seeing in the front end application is also stored in the back end of the system, which is database, when you want to make sure that, this called backend testing. And there is a technique, or there is a way how to do the backend testing, which is using the SQL query. And I have 3 separate sessions for that, and I'll explain more further on that. Make sense?
Yes.
So for your job function, it is very crucial to have 4 things. You need to know how to analyze the requirement. You need to know how to write test case. You need to know how to execute a test case. What is the defect management process, and how to run SQL queries to do the backend testing. So the backend testing is very crucial. So as you can see, I have 3 separate sessions for it. So you guys know how significant is that.
Yes.
Okay. So security testing. So this technique is very useful when you have to know whether the application is secure or not, right? So let's say you guys create username and password, right? So if somebody kind of go to my website, and if somebody kind of able to see what was your username or password for my website, that means this website is not secure, because somebody already kind of able to find out that information, and this website is not secure enough. So when you have to make sure whether the website is secure or not, that's called the security testing. And those technique, I mean, you guys may not gonna do this testing, or you may not gonna involve in that, because it require some sort of coding knowledge, and also you need to have some sort of tools. There is a separate team for that. There is a security team out there who does this type of testing. So
Mhm.
you guys know the cyber security folks and information security folks. There's a separate team out there who oversee the security of the application or security of the company. I mean, they do those kind of work. So you guys don't need to do any testing on that. Maybe you guys have to know the definition. What is the security testing? So this testing will ensure how well the system protects against unauthorized internal and external access, right? So whatever example I gave you, somebody can see your username and password, uh, then this website is not secure. So when you check those type of thing, it's called security testing. Clear?
Yes.
So last one is UAT. So you guys already know what is UAT testing, so I don't have to spend a lot of time. So it's just more like, once you finish developing the software, there will be somebody from the client side who will be performing this testing again, just to make sure whatever the client is requesting, those are matching or not. When they do this type of task or activity, is called UAT testing. This testing happens in the final phase. So once you finish your testing, then it will be ready for UAT testing, and it will be happen before the application goes to the market. Clear?
Yeah.
All right, guys. So I think that's pretty much what we have in this session. I'm going to stop